Thank you very much. I gave a talk back at the Preservation Society's AGM in December, so I've dusted off that slideshow. It was a bit long, so my strategy was add more slides and go faster, so I think that's going to work. So this is the first really good map we have of Bexhill. This is the Duke of Dorset's survey map commissioned in 1805, showing the village centre, so the church, the pub, the manor house, and also the Hanoverian barracks. And then separated off down one side we have Bell Hill. So that's the structure of Old Town. We're still sort of familiar with, minus the barracks. So here it is. This is from the 1950s. So Bexhill has been here for a very long time. We have lots of archaeological evidence for people in Bexhill going back thousands of years. Now, unfortunately, we developed the town so early that a lot of the archaeology was lost. But this is a 1950s photograph of the church farm estate. And you can see here some very interesting earthworks. So there's these sort of banks that run around the old town, and apparently these were also visible on the other side of the hill. So it looks like they went all around the old town. I can't tell you what these features were, but something was going on here in prehistory. The first written reference we get to Bexhill is in King Offa of Mercia's charter of 772 AD. King Offa very kindly came down here in 771 and beat us all up. So there was a battle, we lost, and we were annexed into Mercia. And this is his charter. So this is the first time that Bexhill is mentioned. And there's also lots of interesting places in the charter. We have the Haunted Ford, we have the Goblin Well, and we also have Funor's Lair. So that's down on the marsh. Funor is the Anglo-Saxon version of Thor. So he lived around here, so who knew? Probably the most important thing in Bexhill is the Bexhill stone. This is either late 9th or early 10th century, and this was discovered under the nave of St. Peter's Church when the Victorians modified the church in 1878. So it was first thought to be the lid of a child's coffin. The more up-to-date interpretation, this was a lid that would have contained holy relics. So the church that King Offa established was a minster, so it had a role going and preaching in the surrounding countryside. So it was an important place, and you would expect it to have its spiritual power by having some relics within the church itself. So King Offa gave the land to Bishop Oswald, Bishop of Selsey, and they later on became the bishops of Chichester. So the bishops were the landowners of Bexhill up until 1570. This is the church farm or chantry farm. So when the chantry chapel was created in the church in the 15th century, the church was created to provide an income for the chantry chapel. So, historical events. We have in 1780 a witch trial in Bexhill. It ended quite happily that they were found not to be witches and they were set free. We're going to have a look at a series of early drawings of Bexhill attributed to Francis Grose. These date to about 1798. Now, Francis Grose is dead by 1798, so I don't think that attribution is actually a very accurate one, but in the style of Francis Grose. So we're seeing the early village. So this is a small hilltop farming community, so just farmland surrounding it. And here we are. This is what was described as Mr. Brooks' farm. So this is Bexhill Manor House, sometimes known as Court Lodge. So functionally, it was a large farm, but it's where the manor court was held, so it had an important administrative function. It was also, in its early days, a mini bishop's palace. This was the easternmost residence of the bishops of Chichester. So if they were coming over to this part of the country, they would stay in the manor house. So it was a very, very important site. And we're seeing here a little bit more of the farming side of the manor house there, looking down towards the sea. And this is Rosier's. This is the building that later on becomes Linkwell. I won't say too much more about Linkwell. Right, so I shall move on very, very quickly. They're very nice, aren't they? And here is an early version of St. Peter's Church before the Victorians got at it. And the road going out towards Hastings. And this is the militia barracks. These were created in 1798, so we have a military presence in Bexhill due to the Napoleonic Wars, and these had a huge impact on the village. So for 10 years, the village turned into a substantial garrison town, and between 1804 and 1814, this was the base of the King's German Legion. This is 1818. We're looking up the hill here, so we're looking from the west up Bell Hill towards Bexhill village. And if you look along the coastline there, you may just be able to see a Martello Tower. These were the forts built from about 1805 to keep the French from invading. The French didn't bother invading because we had nice Martello Towers here, but they were used extensively to keep the local smugglers under control, because unfortunately the local population were rascals. There still are, yes. So we don't have that many good pictures of the barracks. This is the best one I've found showing some of the barrack buildings. So we had 2,000 or 3,000 German troops here, possibly a little bit more than that, and less than 2,000 local people. So the German soldiers rather outnumbered the local population. And as you can imagine, there was intermarrying and other liaisons, so this was a massive boost to Bexhill's gene pool. Now, there's something very healthy and preserving about the water or climate of Bexhill. This is a poster from 1819, and it was to commemorate the birthday of King George III. At the Bell Hotel, the dinner was held for gentlemen of the parish in their 80s. They were waited upon at table by gentlemen in the 70s, while the church bells were rung by gentlemen in their 60s. And it says this is from a whole male population which does not exceed 1,000. So people are living on to a ripe old age. So this reputation we see used later on for marketing the resort of Bexhill-on-Sea, but there may be something in it. And certainly some early entrepreneurs were bottling some of the local chalybeate spring water, this rather rusty water we get coming out of the ground, which would have been horrible. I think the fresh air was probably better for you than the nice spring water. So most of my talk is actually made up of all the pictures of Old Town I can find rummaging around in the museum store. So we're going to be having a look at some of the photographs of the church before the renovations. And this is a lovely postcard. So this is the pre-1878 St. Peter's Church. I like this one, Bexhill Church from the shed. Yeah. And there is this wonderful tower. And there's some lovely photographs which were taken about 1877. So I think they were probably taken to record the building before work started. So there's rather beautiful natural light photographs of the inside of St. Peter's Church. And again, it was during this restoration work that the Saxon origins of the building became clear. In the nave, herringbone stonework was found, which was characteristically Saxon, and also the Bexhill stone itself. And we, not that long ago, acquired a little sketchbook of drawings. And this is one St. Peter's Church. I thought, oh, it doesn't look like they finished it. When I looked at the date, 1878, it's actually recording the restoration work on the church. So the roof isn't there because the roof wasn't there at the point that this drawing was made. So I think that's a good find. And there we see the post-restoration St. Peter's Church, almost as we see it today. So this is from a garden, I think it's Osborne House garden there, from High Street looking across. And within the church, we have a lovely medieval bit of stained glass here, which was borrowed in the 18th century by Horace Walpole and added onto his Gothic villa at Strawberry Hill. And we eventually managed to get this back in 1921. So this bit of medieval stained glass is very well travelled. And we're looking through here into the Chantry Chapel with this wonderful mural, which was executed in 1951, and this is the bit I get excited about, by the famous archaeological illustrator Alan Sorrell, who was also a muralist. So if anyone remembers all the sort of English heritage signs for sort of for big archaeological sites around the country, they usually had an Alan Sorrell reconstruction of what they used to look like. And here he is putting the mural into St. Peter's. Here we are looking at the parish church and village in 1888. Lich gates here in the 1860s, without a lich gate. I presume they called it something else at that time. And the salt box. So we do really have a nice collection of drawings, paintings and photographs of early Bexhill. This one is called A Peep at the Sea. So you can actually see the sea on the left there. And just a reminder that our economic backbone was agriculture. So we're seeing some sheep being herded through Church Street. And I've been a bit naughty. I've actually strayed out of Old Town here, although I suppose everything is Old Town pre-resort. This is the seafront. This is Sea Lane Cottage. And it's just worth remembering that Sea Lane, what we now know as Sea Road, was the way that heavy goods were brought into Bexhill. So if you had coal or things like that to be brought in, road wasn't a very easy way to move things around, so things tended to be brought in by barge. They were dropped on the seafront and taken by wagon up to Bexhill village, but no resort to be seen at this time. And this is Bexhill village from the sheep wash. So this was in the farmland of the manor house, and we're looking at Bexhill village from the north. So that's the back of it. So you should be able to see Bell Hill climbing up the hill there, and Bexhill village at the top. And I always find it quite nice that apparently Bell Hill, before the Victorians gentrified it, was known as Belly Hill. Here we go. This is the village of Bexhill from near the sheep wash, Brooks Farm, August 10th. I think that's 1866, this one. And here we see the sheep wash again. Now, we tend to think of Sea Road as the main way to get up and down from the seafront to Bexhill village, but of course there was a nice shortcut through Brooks Farm. So there's a number of images and photographs that show this shortcut, not to be confused with Sea Road, because on the left you can make out the sort of looming presence of the Metropolitan Convalescent Home. We'll hear a little bit more about that later. So one of the names closely associated with Old Bexhill are the Brooke family. This is Arthur Sawyer, Squire Brooke, and he was the bailiff for Earl Delaware, so he was here to boss everybody around. One of the descriptions I found of him was arch Tory and sometime king of Bexhill. We did have quite important visitors to the early village pre-resort. We had a number of royals coming down. Squire Brooke ran the Bexhill Harriers pack of foxhounds, and we know that Princess Victoria came along and hunted with them, and the Prince of Wales came as well. And apparently at Sandringham, the Prince of Wales had a portrait of Squire Brooke hanging up, and it's probably a version of this that we're looking at here. So it's quite well connected. At one point, they lost the King of Portugal, and he was found in Bexhill, hanging around with Squire Brooke. So it all gets a little bit strange. So this is a picture of the manor house from 1866. It's a drawing attributed to Squire Brooks, probably is, and then we've got a sort of a colourised version of it, which is really rather nice. So it was a large farmhouse. This is where the manor court was held, but it was really, just a large farm building. It was getting a little bit dilapidated by the end of the 19th century, so the Brookes moved out to their other residence, Brook Lodge, on the other side of Upper Sea Road, now known as the Grange. And I've sort of borrowed this picture. We don't have it in the collection. Somebody sort of sent it to me and said, I've got this picture, can you tell me what it is? I got very excited. This is the view of the sea from the manor house. So you can see that path going down across the fields, and you should also be able to see the sheep wash as well. Well, I thought this was a wonderful discovery. So, moving on a bit, we see the Delaware family. So we have Muriel Brassey, later Countess Delaware, with the hat sitting at the front, and the chap without the hat is Gilbert, the 8th Earl Delaware. So Gilbert marries Muriel in 1891. His father, the 7th Earl Delaware, who's responsible for the development of Bexhill as a resort, really transferred most of the control of the Delaware estate to his son. They spent quite a lot of money. They spent about £13,000 doing up the manor house, and they moved in. And then we have this golden age of life in and around Bexhill, all centred around Bexhill Manor House. So they had garden parties, sporting events. It was all going terribly well until the Earl ran off with an actress and Muriel divorced him, and then they moved out. But that's probably a talk for another occasion. The manor house was rented out after the divorce to the de Mont family. August Nevin de Mont was the son of quite a wealthy German newspaper magnate. De Mont was an artist. So we've got some nice pictures of the inside of Bexhill Manor House from 1912. You don't tend to see too many internal photographs. This is the dining room, looking rather splendid. And here it is on the outside. So there were a number of extensions to the building and a number of outbuildings as well. So we have South Lodge. Not all these buildings connected up. And this is a lovely watercolour of the manor house by a gentleman called Francis Brown T, who was probably part of that coterie of artists based here in Bexhill around August Nevin de Mont. And we have this lovely picture of the manor house. And we've got this lovely one of where you're sitting this evening. I quite like the coat of the suit of armour in the background there. I'm not quite sure what the chair and the pot is about. I don't know whether this is a glorified ashtray for whoever sits there. And some later, these are 1960s watercolours of the manor house. And there it is. So quite close up against Hastings Road, which we'll see a little bit later on. Ooh. We've lost the bottom part of that. We seem to be a little bit zoomed in on these. I don't know whether I can do anything technical to zoom them out slightly. Okay. We lost some nuns there. I do apologise for those nuns. So with the 1950s here, you can see it's very, very narrow. And of course, this is what eventually did for Bexhill Manor House. So, slight change of tack now. I wanted just to show you some lovely pen and ink drawings by a gentleman called Charles Graves, who was an artist based in St Leonard's, but he would often hold art classes in Bexhill Village. They're slightly misleading, some of these, because this set, he's working from old photographs. So though he drew these at about the turn of the 19th into the 20th century, they're actually views of Bexhill a little bit earlier on. And obviously here, this is Bexhill Parish Church before the 1878 alterations, so this is an early view. And I quite like this rather creepy view of the parish church with somebody up a ladder. I don't know whether you can see there's somebody up a ladder. Might be a little bit dark there.
Oh, yeah.
And some children lurking around in the graveyard. And he also did this beautiful picture of the inside, which I think is based on that photograph that we saw a little bit earlier on. And here we're seeing, these are southern hounds, which are apparently extinct, so they're not going to catch any more foxes, which I think is a good thing. And this is the Bell Hotel before its 1888 restoration. And of course, the walnut tree, which was really emblematic of Bexhill village. We don't really know when it was planted, but they have a certain lifespan, walnut trees. So it's dead by about 1900. I cut it down because it's dead. It wasn't this massive act of vandalism. It wasn't a living tree. I think it was unsafe. So presumably this is planted about 1700, early 18th century, something like that. And it would have been planted within the grounds of the manor house. And actually the road has nibbled an island around it. And here we can see the forge. And also South Lodge, which is part of Bexhill Manor House, but it's a separate freestanding building. High Street there, Pocock's. Looking along High Street towards South Lodge. And this is a rather beautiful oil painting by Charles Graves of High Street. So we're really lucky to have this record of early Bexhill. And this one does puzzle me a little bit. It's 1872. It's from just outside South Lodge. So what we're seeing on the left are parts of the Manor House complex. The chap pointing, I think, is pointing along High Street, and then it will be Upper Sea Road just next to it. So that's roughly what we're looking at here. Everybody's standing in the middle of the road, which I think is great. I mustn't say too much about Linkwell, other than it's a very splendid building. So looking along High Street, we have Linkwell, built on the site of Rosier's. But I just wanted to have a quick look at this postcard of High Street, because I think I shall get corrected here if I've got this wrong. We are looking at the entrances to the Linkwell. So,
you are indeed.
Right, good, I'm glad I got that right.
I've got that one up too. So
right, okay.
I'll jump in.
Well, this was the town's well inside Linkwell. You had to go in there. Well, obviously the houses had their own water supplies, but if you were wandering around Bexhill and you didn't live there, if you wanted to have a drink of water, you would have to have gone into Linkwell here to get it. By about 1899, they'd locked it up and you had to get a key from the church, and there was some complaints about that they'd locked it up. They got rid of this free water supply. And again, another early one of High Street, looking east towards South Lodge, looking rather beautiful. And then we've got, what have we got? We've got the chemists, we've got Pocock's, and then we're looking all the way through to the end of High Street. So some beautiful early photographs of High Street. And here we are in 1900, and these are soldiers leaving Bexhill for the Second South African campaign. So the latter part of the Boer War, some of our soldiers going off. Earl Delaware went off to cover parts of this campaign, to sort of cover up the fact he'd just been divorced. So he went off, and then he got wounded and invalided back to Bexhill and got into even more trouble. But again, that's another story. So Bexhill Post Office. And looking the other way, so we have the post office. The bay window, just above the post office, we'll come back to that. We have Schindler's, the clockmaker, on the corner there on the other side. And here we are. This is about 1906, I think, this one. And we're into the 1930s. So it's really remarkable how little change there is with the look, which is a great thing. It hasn't been spoiled. So this is from the 1934 book, A Cabbage for a Year by Minnie Pallister. So Can you spot that bay window again? She was a great Welsh political speaker. She had this magnificent career, and then she had a throat problem, which was nearly fatal. She managed to recover. So this bit about being a cabbage for a year, she comes to Bexhill to try and recover her health. She was a very keen gardener. She'd written another book on gardening. So the book is really about her stay in Bexhill. Bexhill's never mentioned, but if you read between the lines, it's very clearly Bexhill and very clearly High Street. And she's complaining here about a ghost in the house that she's staying in. It's worth mentioning with Minnie that another famous Bexhill resident, Spike Milligan, based a famous character from the Goon show on Minnie. So Minnie Bannister, who has got a funny squeaky voice in the Goons, is clearly a reference to Minnie Pallister, who obviously had this throat injury which sort of put an end to her speaking career. So we're seeing here, this is 1888, we can see the brand new Jubilee clock, which went in 1887, and we can see the walnut tree within the grounds of the manor house. So this is a very interesting picture. It looks sadder and sadder as we go on the pictures of the walnut tree, as it gets older. So they're cutting it back. Again, that's the side of South Lodge that we're seeing. There's a nice dog there, and just children hanging around on the street corners. Got a nice little street light next to it there. And this is looking from the other side. So this island was just nibbled out from the manor house grounds. And here it is, 1906. It finally gets the chop. Earl Brassey, who was mayor of Bexhill, had the town hall gavel made from some of the wood. It hangs around as a sort of ornamental stump. That doesn't sound very nice, but that's what it was. It's this little island that stays there until the early 1920s. So it's still a landmark of sorts. And this is probably one of the oldest photographs that I've got to show you here. So we're looking along Church Street. That is the original Bell Hotel before it was got at in 1888. And that's St. Peter's Church before it was got at in 1878. So it really is quite a remarkable early view. So 1866, we're looking at the original version of the Bell. So obviously a pub is quite an important place to have in a village, but it also had its assembly rooms there. So it was a mini theatre, so dances, events were held there. If there were political rallies, this was where that would take place. So really, really important building. They seem to have an understanding with the local smugglers, because there's one report of the Battle of Sidley Green in 1808 that some of the contraband and some wounded smugglers are secreted away in the Bell Hotel to keep them safe. And here we are, everybody lined up. Everyone's turned out for this photograph. It's a rather motley group, that. But it gets gentrified. So this is it. Still a very, very grand building. So this is a 1920s photograph showing the 1888 frontage to the Bell Hotel. And the big windows for the assembly rooms at the back. So all the children hanging around there. Everybody's showing off. Every time somebody gets a camera out in those photographs, people strike a pose. So I guess there weren't that many opportunities to have your photograph taken. So if the opportunity occurred, you had to grab it. These kids look a little bit young to be turned out at the pub. Perhaps that's why they've been thrown out. And this is the view looking the other way from Church Street towards our stumpy walnut tree. So it's an early 20th century here. And then the Lich Gate, I think this is 1913. So this is part of the Dunn legacy for Bexhill. So another very important family. The Dunn family paid for the Lich Gate. Stumpy ivy-covered walnut tree there. Some horses' carts, that's rather nice. And we're looking at a watercolour version of the stump. So that's there until the early 1920s. And I think this is possibly one of the earliest pictures I've got that shows the Jubilee clock. So it's probably news 1887, so it's probably when this photograph dates from. Get another horse and cart. There's a man looking for his horse and cart there. So yes, it's Cave Austin warehouse there. Now, of course, the thing about warehouses, if you're storing lots of things like flour and other dusty things like that, they have a bit of a tendency to explode. So 1808, we have the terrible fire that destroyed the Cave Austin warehouse and rather cooked the Jubilee clock. Unfortunately, the outer part survived. The fire engine, which is the one we still have in the museum, the Merriweather, was turned out and went in the wrong direction. So the place burnt down. Again, if something's on fire, that's an even better opportunity to have your photograph taken. So very, very exciting. So the metalwork largely survives, but that clock isn't going to do anything. And this is the restarting of the Jubilee clock later in 1908. So within the same year, they had replaced, restored, got it working, the new Jubilee clock. They had preserved the bit of string that was used to originally start it, and they restarted it with the same bit of string, and I've still got that bit of string in the museum. So this is 1912. This is one photograph from the De Mont family album. So again, another important landmark, which we still have. It's all working again now, isn't it?
Yes, it's looking amazing.
And here it is in the 1970s. So the Cave Austin warehouse has gone, but we have the Bexhill Antiques Centre, which is where probably a lot of people still remember the building. And a lovely little cottage just opposite the manor house on Hastings Road. I think there's a little cat. Can you see a little cat? Just on the windowsill. And another early one here. We're looking up Topper Road. I think that horse has been around again. With the Forge, South Lodge and Jubilee clock. And there's a very interesting little sort of stockade there. And a very woolly donkey. So it's an early postcard. So it's probably about 1912-ish, something like that. So the ivy really taking over South Lodge there. And this is from about 1920. So looking both ways down Upper Sea Road. And having a look inside. Now this photograph isn't quite as ancient as I thought. It actually comes from a publication that was just put out just post-war, so I think it's about 1947. So I don't think the photograph is probably too much older than that. It's probably possibly no more than late 1930s. So still really an important part of the village. And really practical, because you could repair things. There wasn't this culture of throwing everything away. You couldn't afford to. So horses needed to be shod. Later on, bicycles became a big thing in Bexhill, so you have your bicycle repaired, and some of these forges sort of developed into the motoring trade as well, so some of them developed into garages. So I want to show you some lovely, these are postcards based on paintings by a lady called Florence E. Hoare, who I can't tell you very much about other than she painted some lovely watercolours of Bexhill village which were made into postcards. So we have Church Street, everybody looking busy there. Yeah, so we can see looking there towards Saltbox and Lichgates, and the Lichgate. Hastings Road, we've got a nun, so the nun has survived in this one. Seems to be lots of nuns in Bexhill because we had Nazareth House at one side and then we have a convent down at the bottom of Sea Road as well, so just going about their business. And a very elegant lady there walking down the middle of the road, which would have been a nice thing to be able to do in High Street. And they're about 1966. The artist just signs herself as VEL, so they're relatively modern watercolours, but very nice. And then we're looking down Chantry Lane. So I'm not going to stray too far out of central Bexhill village. So again, this is about 1912. Notice that little lamp. We'll see that again later. Children standing in the road there. And here we are in the 1920s with a Bexhill bus going down Sea Road and Chantry Cottage on the end there. So Chantry Cottage in the 1970s. So without stepping on anyone else's toes, we'll just have a quick look inside Chantry Cottage in the 1970s, which isn't quite what you might expect. So we have Alexander's and Betty Britton inside the Alexandrian temple in Bexhill Old Town. But that's another story, which I will leave. Oh, there's all sorts of exciting things going on. But coming back to the manor house, this is it, 1968, right at the end of its lifetime, and you can see the road just next to it, and that's why they got rid of it. I still haven't got over this. I don't think they should have done this. They should have come up with a better solution, but there you go. We can't do anything about it now. But that is the end of the second most historic building in Bexhill-on-Sea, and they pulled it down. So it is a shame. I'm sure they could have come up with a better solution. Now, there wasn't too much objection to the manor house being pulled down that I could find, but there was a bit of objection to what they proposed putting up in its place. The idea of pulling it down was that they could build a skyscraper on the site. And some people didn't think this was a terribly clever idea. And they got together and they founded the Old Town Preservation Society. So we lost the manor house, but we didn't get the tower block. So, you know, mixed results there.
Yeah.
So this is the view the view you would have had looking along Church Street. This is a bit of a shocker, this. 1972, Princess Alexandra visits Bexhill, famously flies in by helicopter to the Delaware Lawns, comes up to Bexhill Old Town and opens the Manor Gardens. We were celebrating the 1200th birthday of Bexhill-on-Sea. And also I get in terrible trouble if I don't mention this. As part of the celebration, a display of historic costume from the Thalia School of Drama, run by Isabel Overton and Christine Porch, opened up. Here's Princess Alexandra having a look, and everybody liked it so much they did it the next year, and they did the next year, and it stayed as a permanent fixture. It became a charity. It became the Bexhill Museum of Costume and Social History, and then in 2003 we amalgamated with Bexhill Museum to form the current museum down at the Edgerton Road site. So it was very sad to see the old building go. I was there, last person there, so I took down the old sign for the Bexhill Costume Museum. I thought, I'll take this back to the museum, don't want this to go astray. And then I realised Bexhill Old Town was a bit stranger than I thought, because I turned it over. And somebody had been using it as a Ouija board. So somebody was sneaking into the Manor Gardens, taking the sign down and contacting the spirit world. So again, very, very curious. So, this is an important building. This is the Metropolitan Convalescent Home that was built in 1881. So, for the first time, an important London charity wanted to invest money in Bexhill. So, 7th Earl Delaware's eyes lit up and thought, oh, that's interesting. Agricultural depression, I'm not getting much from the rents around here. So I think this was the thing that the catalyst to the development of the resort of Bexhill-on-Sea. So it's absolutely enormous. It's a slightly more modern photograph of it. Later on in life, it lasts to the 1980s, it was known as East Down House. It's now the site of Demolins Close, so it's just over there. So this was bringing a lot of people into Bexhill to get their health back with our funny rusty water and our nice sea air. And we're seeing a little bit of the resort there. I better skip on past that because you don't want to see any pictures of the resort tonight. Hastings Road and Dorset Lodge. This was another important building. Some of the early local government meetings were held in the assembly rooms in the Bell, and later on they were held here. And this is George Herbert Gray, the borough surveyor. He's his mayor at this time, and he's reminiscing about some of his early experiences of local government in Bexhill. And there's a lovely little detail in here that the old towners referred to the newbies down the resort as the squatters. So that's the opinion that they had of the newcomers to Bexhill. Because of course the resort was never a gradual development of the existing community. It was an entirely new community that was bussed in and dropped on them. So there was a little bit of a split between the people in the old town and the people from the new resort. So there's a later on photograph of Dorset Lodge there, which was supposed to be haunted and full of smugglers, possibly not at the same time. Now, I gave this talk last in December, and snowy views of Bexhill were topical. They're slightly less topical, so I won't dwell on them now. But here we are in Chantry Lane, possibly Narnia. I'm not sure. It could go either way. But with a bit of snow, it looks wonderful. And this is a photograph by Emile Wieler. So it's about 1910-ish of St. Peter's under snow. Looking wonderful there. And these are from the Bexhill Observer used to do a special Christmas number. And this is 1910. There's some lovely views. I've gone up to the church tower to get some views around there. Chantry Lane again. And we're looking at the rectory and the rectory grounds. Another building that's sadly lost. So that's where Peterhouse was built in 1966. And last time I finished with this one, because this is the Bexhill 1940 Winter Wartime Model Railway. This is our patron, Susie Eddy, is our project to show us what Bexhill looked like at Christmas 1914, which worked very well. And the other year, the Model Railway team rebuilt Bexhill Village, Bexhill Old Town, to make it a little bit realistic, because the first version was a little bit rushed and generic. It's now much better. So I wanted to go back to 1866 again to have a look at this picture of St. Peter's Church and the rectory grounds. So a very splendid building. So this is sort of 1910-ish, I think. Another postcard view from about 1912. Mostly so I could get in this picture of a guides meeting in the grounds with St. Peter's Church in the background. So again, the rectory grounds were used for all sorts of events. And just to make it a little bit more topical, I thought I would finish up. So this is 1910. Earl Brassey has come back to Bexhill. So this is it's maypole dancing. I was going to say May Day. This is actually technically in July, but nobody cared in Bexhill. If there was an opportunity to have a maypole and do some maypole dancing, they went for it. So I thought I would just leave it on this slide. It's as topical as I could get. If you've got any questions, I will bluff my way through. Thank you.